Well, we're going to get into it today with Dr. Peter McCullough. He is a cardiologist, chief scientific officer for the Wellness Company, expert on cardiovascular medicine with over 30 years of experience. He has spoken widely on a number of topics, but he's very concerned about the mRNA vaccines. He co-authored The Courage to Face COVID-19, Preventing Hospitalization and Death While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex. That was just now removed from Amazon, which seems somewhat scandalous. PeterMcCulloughMD.com is where you can find out more. McCullough spelled McCullough, PeterMcCullough.com. Twitter is P_McCulloughMD, P_McCulloughMD. Of course, Dr. Kelly Victory is here with us. I'm going to bring her in as early as possible because Dr. McCullough has a heart out. So let's get to it. I think everyone knows the next medical crisis could be just around the corner, whether it comes in the form of another pandemic or something much more routine like a tick bite. You and your family need to be prepared. That's where the Wellness Company comes in. You know the Wellness Company. We have their physicians on like Dr. McCullough frequently. The Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy.
It's a safety net. It's an insurance policy
absolutely.
That you hope you're not going to need, but if you need it, you sure as heck are going to wish you had it if you need it.
Be ready for anything. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. The medical emergency kit provides a guidebook to aid in the safe use of all these life-saving medications. From anthrax to tick bites to COVID-19, the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit is exactly what you need to have on hand to be prepared. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next. Go to drdrew.com/TWC. That is DRDREW.com/TWC to get 10% off today. Just click on that link. Let me go right to it and get Dr. Peter McCullough in here. As I said, P_McCulloughMD and PeterMcCullough.com for more information. But Dr. McCullough, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So I like to stay abreast of the literature as it emerges. And the New England Journal puts out an electronic version of the publication every week or every 2 weeks. And I thought you might like this because it just came out, just literally during the intro to the show. This is one of the lead articles, and it's framed this way. The article is named, "Do Pandemics Ever End?" And it says, as an opening paragraph, since pandemics are socio-political as well as epidemiological events, their end is determined not only by epidemiologic criteria, but by social, political, and ethical concerns. When did that happen to pandemic? When did an infectious disease outbreak become a socio-political anything? Obviously impacts socio-political functioning, but determining a pandemic? That mind-blowing.
It's true. We're coming up on 4 years of the pandemic years, if you will. It's spanning quite a distance in time. The Spanish flu was about 2 years and it finished. So many have conjectured what has made this one last so long, and I agree with you. Some of it's just contextual of what people think is going on and how it's presented to them in the media. We are in the midst of a very minor outbreak now, and we have the most diverse subvariant strains so far we've ever had in an outbreak. They typically have been single strain or single subvariant strain outbreaks. It's very, very diverse. The leaders are EG5 and FL1.5, but now HB1 is coming up in third position. XBB 1.5, that was the original target of the most recent boosters. That one now is at 0%, according to the CDC nowcast as of September 22nd, 2023. And
let me interrupt you, Peter.
I want
to hang a lantern on that. I want to make sure people hear what you said because it could go past them. The booster is directed at XBB, and XBB is at 0%. So the question is, does it have any collateral effect? And I saw some data on EG5, and it was like, oh yeah, it seems to have some effect on that. Well, that's now almost gone too. So what are we doing here with this booster?
Yeah. There were 10 animals tested with the new, the new form of the vaccine, and it did raise antibodies equally against XBB 1.5, which is now gone, and EG5, which is, I think, roughly about 20% of strains. But these antibody studies have not been valid surrogates of really providing immunity, that is, preventing anything in a human being so far. But the point I was going to make is that we still are at record pandemic lows in terms of hospitalizations and deaths. And despite cases being up a little bit, even unadjudicated hospitalizations and deaths at a record low. I personally haven't had a patient in the hospital, and I hear about cases and I treat them in my practice. I haven't had a patient in the hospital in over 2 years.
Well, I know both you and Kelly are skeptical of Paxlovid, but I've been using a lot of it to great effect in elderly patients, primarily where it's been approved. But my question is, why do none of the commentaries about the necessity of vaccine, particularly in middle-aged and young people, take into account the fact that we have treatments? We have molnupiravir, we have Paxlovid. Forget the early treatment controversy. We have 2 really effective pharmaceutical drugs. Whether you want to use them or not is a whole separate issue. Why does that never come into the conversation about these requirements for vaccine in population where the risk reward is reversed, where there's not much benefit to be derived, and increasingly risk is being sort of, it's becoming more clear that there's a lot of risk there. Why are they pushing so hard? I can't get it, and then leaving treatment out of the equation entirely.
I think the strategy from the very beginning was a vaccine-only strategy. You can think vaccinated get sick too, so they would need treatment. I've used plenty of Paxlovid as well as molnupiravir. I incorporated them into the McCullough protocol, as soon as they came out. I've actually used all the drugs. I'm very diverse. I'm not biased towards one drug or the other. I do have to say I am very impressed with the performance of the virucidal nasal sprays and gargles. I think they really beat everything in the protocol. Dilute iodine or xylitol-based colloidal silver, and then scopolamine Listerine with some iodine or xylitol. This is amazing how good they are. 17 trials, 3 large randomized trials. They drop PCR positivity very quickly. They were the way to reduce spread of the illness. And when carried out, they reduced rates of hospitalization, need for oxygen. So I think they're very impressive. You never hear any public health messaging about nasal and oral hygiene.
No, that's right. We were an early promoter of the betadine solution. It was actually worked out and studied by an ophthalmologist who lived in the Caribbean or something. And I spoke to the guy, and we went over the data. He was like, "This is astonishing stuff. Why is no one getting behind it?" And still, nothing.
It's true. The theory is that the virus is in this exponential replication phase. And the sprays don't kill all the virion particles, but they kill enough so mucosal immunity can protect against invasive disease. And it works for the common cold, works for influenza, should work for any next respiratory pandemic. I didn't know about this before the pandemic. So a cold for me personally used to be 3 days of a sore throat, then 3 or 4 days of nasal congestion, and then a week to finish it up. About a 2-week experience. And I have had colds now where I carry an iodine-based spray and gargles, and I can tell you right now, I've reduced a common cold to about a day.
I'd like to know how your life has changed with all this. What were you doing before, and what are you doing now? How can people understand what has happened to you? I think they see you now, and I don't think they understand the road you've traveled. And I'd like you to just sort of tell them that tale, if you would.
I'm formerly, full professor of medicine. I'd ascended the academic ranks. I'm former chief of cardiology at the University of Missouri in Kansas City. I was the chief academic scientific officer for the St. John Providence Health System, the biggest health ministry for Ascension Health. I had moved to Texas to take care of my family, and was in that sandwich year as a father looking after parents and children. And I had a very nice position at a major medical center here in Dallas. And when COVID hit, I got a big research grant to study how we could try to prevent it. I had an investigation into a drug application. The White House contacted me and asked me for help, and then the U.S. Senate. So I got involved. But prior to COVID, I was well known in my field. I was the most published person in the field of heart and kidney interactions. I published the textbook chapter in Braunwald's textbook of cardiology. I had my own textbook, Cardiorenal Medicine. I was the inaugural editor of Cardiorenal Medicine and of reviews in cardiovascular medicine for decades. I had lectured all over the country. I'd lectured at the FDA, the EMA. I've been on data safety monitoring boards, New York Academy of Sciences. So I was well known in my field. I think in 2007, I was on C-SPAN for hours for a congressional oversight hearing. But COVID brought me to being a role as a public figure. And what I couldn't understand is why other doctors didn't jump on board and try to help in treating patients. And treatment still was undersubscribed all the way through. I know you were out there, I was out there, Kelly was out there, but we were too few. And what we know in a paper by Verdkirk and colleagues is that the only people who ended up hospitalized or worse dying, and almost all the deaths occurred in the hospital, is because they were undertreated in the ambulatory phase of the illness.
Sure, of course. That was the part that was shocking to me, that we really abandoned our post. I couldn't believe it, and I come to understand how many doctors are employees, and the employer was giving them mandates and from on high, and they were frozen. They were scared to death to do anything. Speaking of the cardiorenal stuff, did you see, this is just a complete sidebar before I bring Dr. Victory in, that there was a study today on renal effect of Ozempic, of all things, and that the renal metabolic syndrome, this is a new category of metabolic syndrome, was dramatically reduced by this medication. Did you see that today? It was just today.
It's true. The GLP-1 active drugs, as well as the SGLT2 inhibitors, have been revolutionary. They improve both heart and kidney outcomes, cause weight loss by different mechanisms. So we're using these drugs very successfully in practice. That was the whole reason why I was really pushing that cardiorenal field. The hypothesis was if we did something that helps the kidneys, it would help the heart and vice versa, and it's really paid off.
And, again, hypertension and the whole metabolic process of obesity, this is all tied together, and that we're finally looking at it that way, which is important, I'd say. Right. I'm not recommending Ozempic. Anybody who accuses me of that, I'm saying if your doctor recommends it, there's some significant benefits to be derived. All right, let's get Dr. Victory in here. Do you want to quickly, though, review your catastrophe with Amazon, and then we'll have that as a setup to bring Dr. Victory in?
We were shocked on September 29th when the first author of my book, John Leake, who is a best-selling full-time professional author, found out that our book had been taken down from Amazon. The audiobook and the softcover are self-published. So John and I self-published it through an Amazon publishing agreement. So there's a contract. Amazon, certainly reviewed all the materials, all the chapters. It's very carefully curated, met all the criteria. And it had 18 months of 5-star sales, courage to face COVID-19, preventing hospitalizations and deaths while battling the biopharmaceutical complex. It's being looked at very carefully for a major motion picture. It's extremely well written and understandable because it's written by a professional author. Amazon struck it down on September 19th, claiming, I think really fraudulently, that it had offensive content. And now in a series of email exchanges, they will not tell us what they think is offensive. And because it's self-published, we could actually make a change. It's very easy to do that. And they won't tell us what's offensive about it. They won't let it back up on Amazon. And this is unprecedented. Books are at a different standard than a Twitter account or a Facebook account. Books are work of literary art. And ours has been, out of all the COVID genre books, has been struck down after 18 months of great success. In fact, the month before, Amazon had lowered the price but kept our royalties the same. They do that for very successful books that are selling well. So something's happened, and nobody can explain it.
Well, I've been saying from the beginning that the burning of the books were underway, and it's happened in many, many different ways, and we should be extremely disturbed by this, much the way disturbed by the silencing and firing of professors. These were things that we pointed at in the 50s in the McCarthy area as the extraordinary excesses that should never, ever happen again. And here we are again, coming from a different direction. Well, all right. So Dr. Peter McCullough is with us. As I said, you can get the audiobook, but can you get the book anymore?
You can get the book on Barnes & Noble. as well as on the book website, couragetofacecovid.com.
Okay. And it's petermcculloughmd.com for more information. And also the Twitter handle is P_McCulloughMD. What's up? Also, you've been a big advocate for nattokinase. I think we have an outtake from you from the wellness company advocating the utility of that substance.
Yeah, I have. I've been embroiled in this medical quagmire of what to do with the burgeoning number of patients with long COVID syndrome and those who feel unwell after the vaccines. And every study seems to lead to the spike protein, that spine on the surface of the virus, being the problem. The spike protein is non-amenable to human enzymes breaking it down. After the infection alone, Bruce Patterson has shown the S1 segment stuck in CD16 positive monocytes for up to 15 months after a severe infection. After the vaccines, the S1 and the S2 segment are held in the pre-fusion conformation, and they've been found circulating in the bloodstream free, as well as in tissues that are inflamed and developing organ dysfunction. So the spike protein seems to be the culprit. The Japanese
go ahead.
Yeah. The Japanese use natto, which is the breakdown product of soy, fermentation by a bacteria, Bacillus subtilis natto. They've been using it for its cardiovascular effects for about at least several decades. They've been eating it for 1,000 years. It's a natural thrombolytic, proteolytic enzyme. And indeed, nattokinase in a paper by Obu, another one by Tanakawa, clearly break down the spike protein, even in cell lysate and intact cell models. We don't have clinical data indicating what the outcomes are, but it's so attractive. We started working with it in our practice now for over a year, and we are seeing clinical benefit. Without having funding is going all around us to other problems, but without funding, we're doing the best we can in our clinical practice. Now, we've, in the last few months, added bromelain. Bromelain is a family of enzymes derived from the stems of pineapple, also shown in preclinical studies to break down the spike protein. Bromelain is an FDA-approved drug as an ointment used in deep tissue burns and wounds in 2022. So we know it has a medicinal effect. It is available orally as a capsule. And then lastly, we add curcumin. And curcumin needs to be aided in absorption, preferably with piperine, a derivative of black pepper. And curcumin actually has randomized trials in long COVID. So it actually is in human studies, reduces inflammatory factors. People in generally feel better. So we have put together this triple combination in clinical practice, and I've published this now in the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons. It's on the European Commission preprint server. It's called base spike detoxification. Base spike detoxification, meaning it's a base of treatment of which we can add other things, but we need to, we have found in our practice, we have to commit to this for about 3 to 12 months for people with multiple episodes of COVID, multiple COVID vaccines, in order to make headway in their syndrome.
Peter,
Dr. Victory.
Dr. McCullough, so happy to see you. Great to have you here. When I posted about you appearing on the show with us today, I used the words brilliant and indefatigable about you. And I mean the most sincerely, truly. I am so appreciative of your courage and leadership during this debacle. Who would have thought we'd be still talking about this 4 years later? But happy that you're here. You and Drew covered a lot of territory before I came on, so I want to go back to a couple of things and dig in a little deeper. One thing that you pointed out that I think has been underreported, and those people who don't know of pandemics, I am a student of pandemics, but people who don't know that, you pointed out most pandemics are one single pathogen, one, not multiple variant after variant after variant after variant, the way that we are dealing with COVID, all of these strains that keep. Talk about that and talk about what your theories are about why in the COVID pandemic we are seeing such a huge and ongoing series of mutations and continuation of the disease process.
In 2020, I was the co-principal investigator for a national program for a vaccine. I was a vaccine co-principal investigator for the whole country, and it was a vaccine called the Amodulon vaccine. It was a cellular-based vaccine. And in our proposal, we said we would vaccinate only nursing home patients and nursing home workers, that we wouldn't over-vaccinate the country because we were afraid of actually breeding resistant strains or causing, ecological pressures. Two papers appeared, one by Neeson, the other one by Venkatakrishnan, both showing if we got to more than 25% of the population vaccinated in a highly prevalent pandemic, we would put evolutionary pressures on the virus to have it basically to select for strains that are going to be resistant to the vaccine, or at least be able to, live in a vaccinated person easily. And that's exactly what happened. We did see outbreak after outbreak of single strains, right? So we had the wild type, then alpha. We didn't really have a beta here, but it was in South Africa. Gamma was the worst. That was in the center part of Brazil, but we did have delta. We did have alpha. We did have delta. And then when Omicron came, this was interesting, December of 2021, it literally shut off delta overnight. It closed the immunologic door. And there are two Japanese peer-reviewed papers suggesting that Omicron is so heavily mutated that it may have come out of a lab. And that's the conclusion. It may have come out of a biolab, and that's the conclusion of independent Japanese investigators.
Yeah, I think it's very clear in my estimation that the vaccines were a significant contributor to this ongoing mutations. Mm-hmm. There's a reason we have never launched a mass vaccination program in the middle of a pandemic. That's sort of a fundamental construct of pandemic management. So I wanted to make sure that we got that out there. You posted something interesting and something that I have said many times in the past, where I forced, against my will, which is the only way it would be, that I would take one of these vaccines. I would have also gone for the Novavax, thinking it's of all of the options out there, it's perhaps the least bad, if I could say that'd be the least problematic. Talk a little bit about your thoughts about that vaccine versus the mRNA vaccines.
The mRNA vaccines, they code for the spike protein. They originally coded for the original Wuhan strain, then BA4, BA5, Omicron subvariant, now XBB 1.5. But there's no control over turning off the genetic code for the spike protein. There's no control over how much spike protein the body would get. Novavax is the only antigen-based vaccine and has 5 micrograms of the spike protein, so it's fixed. It's like a tetanus shot, 5 micrograms. And I do think overall, looking at the data, that it's safer than the other vaccines, but unfortunately, it's terribly ineffective. I think I have that on my Substack today. Just like the other vaccines, the duration of coverage is very, very short. And, in most of the analysis, it doesn't even get 50% protection against any outcome.
Yeah, and that's
J&J
I'm not
when it was around. Just curious.
What's that?
You guys, the Johnson & Johnson, whether that's the one I took because I like the idea of a traditional platform that had been well studied. Of course, it had its problems. I was a victim of some of it, but I always had the sense that was not such a relative risk of that vaccine. There's my side effect. I had a sudden raccoon's eye, which is the presenting feature of a transverse sinus thrombosis, which is the dreaded complication of the J&J, and took it off the market because I think there were 5 cases or 10 cases or something. But in retrospect, maybe not as deleterious and maybe efficacious as well.
J&J and of course the outside the United States, the AstraZeneca vaccine or adenoviral vector vaccines, similar to the Sputnik or the Russian vaccine. I think it's called Sputnik. And
yes,
what they do is they have a replication incompetent adenovirus, and then it as it enters the cell, it actually gives the code to produce the spike protein. But again, we found in J&J it was too much spike protein. It was not reproducible. Too much thrombosis. Even the vector tripped off some thrombosis. And so AstraZeneca removed globally, removed in the United States. AstraZeneca turned out to be about 6% of the U.S. Population who took a vaccine took Johnson & Johnson, and the rest took messenger RNA. Less than 1% took Novavax.
Yeah, my concern, I was saying about the Novavax is that I don't care if it's ineffective if I was forced to take it, only because I've been criticized in the past for saying that people who take the mRNA vaccines fundamentally become spike protein, factories. That's what they are. There is no off switch. And I think it is extraordinarily problematic. So anyway, I was interested in your post about that. The big thing I want to get into, go ahead.
Yeah, but Kelly, I just wanted
Go
to point out, have you ever wondered why the CDC never really featured, or HHS never really featured J&J or Novavax in their commercials or their promotional materials? Isn't that interesting?
Yes, very,
Yeah.
very interesting. I assume it has something to do with who owns the patents on those particular vaccines and who was making the money.
Right. NIH co-owns the patent with Moderna, but interestingly, Pfizer and Moderna use the same marketing firm, Weber Shandwick. And Weber Shandwick has an installed marketing unit within the CDC. Their workers are in the CDC vaccine office promoting Pfizer and Moderna, preferentially over J&J and Novavax. So Americans never really got a fair look at the choice of vaccines.
No, and as an aside, I know that my friend Bobby Kennedy, and I know that you are very close with him now too. He's been very vocal about these issues. He said we had Bobby on the show a couple times, and I asked him specifically about how he would manage really the conflicts of interest with regard to our once storied medical journals and the intrusion of big pharma into our medical journals. And interestingly, he said that if he were elected president, he would haul the editors of the big journals in and tell them if they didn't disarticulate their relationship with the pharmaceutical companies, that he would file a RICO case. He would file racketeering charges, which I thought was brilliant. Just as an aside, I thought, because the conflicts of interest, you're talking about a marketing firm being embedded within the CDC. That is so rotten. That is so corrupt that I find myself apoplectic. It's hard to say just what a raw deal Americans have gotten as a result of all of this.
Rand Paul wrote a letter to Walensky and said, listen, you've got Pfizer and Moderna's marketing unit inside the CDC. They're emailing each other about, trying to curry favor to the CDC. And it turns out Walensky and their unit, they paid $53 million to Weber Shandwick to get that marketing. So that's how corrupt it is. Money is just flowing in this biopharmaceutical complex that we describe in my now banned book on Amazon.
Yeah. Unbelievable. The big topic I really want to talk with you about is this issue, and Drew and I have argued about it quite a bit, this issue about myocarditis, and putting to bed once and for all the idea that COVID has just as much a risk of causing myocarditis or pericarditis as the vaccine does. Our mutual friend and colleague, Ryan Cole, we've discussed this with him, and he has stated unequivocally that you are able to stain, if you did the appropriate staining of the myocardium, you would be able to differentiate between spike proteins in the myocardium and the heart muscle that are a result of the vaccine versus those that would be the result from having had the virus. But let's go down that road. Talk about what we know and what the studies have shown with regard to risk of myocarditis from having had COVID versus the vaccines.
Okay. Let's just talk before the vaccine. So we have a period of time before the vaccine, so we cannot implicate the vaccines. It's just what we know. It actually goes back to 1992. Ralph Barrick published in the American Journal of Cardiology, a journal that I was the senior associate editor of, so I know it well. He published in 1992 that if we flood an animal heart in a in vivo model with beta coronavirus, we can cause some myocarditis. So with COVID, there was an a priori concern that COVID would cause myocarditis. So we had screening programs for the NCAA Big Ten, the U.S. military, and the Israeli military. And the U.S. Big Ten is most notable, published in JAMA by Daniels and colleagues. They screened thousands and thousands of athletes. In 2020, 30% of the Big Ten got COVID. So they had biomarkers, troponin and others, EKG, imaging, cardiac MRI, and that huge screening program, they netted about 36 putative cases of possibly myocarditis. And there was no hospitalizations and deaths. It was completely inconsequential. Same thing with the U.S. military and same thing with Israeli military. So they dropped it. So we know community outpatient COVID-19, it's been well studied now, is not a significant cause of myocarditis. Tuvali and colleagues published in Israel an observational study showing in 2020 there was really no increase in myocarditis over the baseline. So where does this talking point come from? Even Fauci said this, that there's way more myocarditis from COVID than the vaccine. It comes from inpatient studies. So in 2020, in inpatient studies of COVID, about 30% of people in the ICU have an elevated troponin, like they do with sepsis, with pneumococcal pneumonia and others. And that troponin elevation is triggering off an ICD code, which in big database studies is reading out as myocarditis. It's not adjudicated myocarditis. It's not confirmed by the Lake Louise criteria or anything else. And so it's a false claim that COVID itself causes significant myocarditis. Now enter in the vaccines, and we have explosive numbers of cases, including many studies showing hospitalized and fatal cases of COVID vaccine myocarditis.
Did you guys have a chance to look at the circulation article that I circulated amongst us? It's from July. It's a Hong Kong article. Did you guys have a chance to see it? You're looking incredulous.
Yeah.
You Peter, you saw it, and it sort of took my breath away that it was showing essentially. just to summarize a good study, frankly, that about half of these young males with mild myocarditis, had chronic, a year later, evidence of myocardial injury and dysfunction, particularly in the right ventricle.
Yeah, it's true. Actually, that paper from Taiwan, there was a paper from Yale, Barmada showed this, that it's not clearing up by MRIs by 9 or 12 months. Now, I can tell you, small areas of late gadolinium enhancement can completely resolve. I've seen that in my clinical practice. It was shown in a paper long before COVID by Bruckmann and colleagues from Germany that non-ischemic areas of late gadolinium enhancement can clearly repair. The heart can repair itself, less so with coronary artery disease and ischemia and infarction. But an important paper by Yonker and colleagues from Massachusetts General Hospital, where they're hospitalizing kids with vaccine myocarditis, not with COVID, but with vaccine myocarditis, they found that the kids who have myocarditis have circulating spike protein in the blood, and the library of antibodies is not neutralizing the spike protein, whereas the kids without myocarditis have spike protein, but the antibodies are appropriately neutralizing it. So it looks like why some get myocarditis and others has to do with a mismatch in the library of antibodies that's raised against the spike protein.
I want to make sure I'm hearing. I'm sorry, Kelly, to keep interrupting here, but are you saying that even though the gadolinium enhancement is still there a year out with stiff right ventricle, all that still has a high probability of resolving?
Well, at a year, we start to worry that it's permanent. But there was two papers by Jenna Schauer and colleagues in the journal Pediatrics with early on with kids with vaccine myocarditis, and these areas were resolving. The big ones were resolving partially. Small ones can completely resolve. I've seen in my practice 7 or 8% left ventricle LGE resolve. But Schauer and some of these kids, by the way, a big area of damage is considered 15% of the left ventricle. Schauer was describing cases where it's 25% of the ventricle damaged with the vaccine in the children she was reporting in her papers. So I think a lot of this is the big areas are not going to completely resolve. Smaller ones will. By the way, myocarditis is treatable. The Japanese, as well as myself, were using prolonged corticosteroids over 3 months, prednisone, colchicine for a full year. Japanese are using IVIG or plasmapheresis. I haven't had to do that. Those who have early heart failure, we use drugs like Entresto and carvedilol. So myocarditis is treatable, and it needs careful observation, and they cannot go on the playing field. Even before COVID, when there's myocarditis, we cannot let them play because the surge of adrenaline could trigger a cardiac arrest. The same surge of adrenaline, by the way, occurs about 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So you hear about kids with myocarditis dying in their sleep, like the paper by Gill and colleagues. But the point is, the leagues were so concerned about myocarditis in 2020, they all had screening programs. Then we enter in the vaccines, right, and the FDA warns that they cause myocarditis by June of 2021, and none of the athletic leagues even screen for it.
Right. So let me just clarify two things here. Part of my job on this show is to put things in lay terms. So what you were saying about this myth, and it is a myth that COVID has higher risk of causing myocarditis as the vaccines. That myth was derived from the idea that these hospitalized patients who were very ill in the ICU had a blood test that would be elevated for anybody in the ICU with a serious infection or serious trauma, serious anything. And it was read out as myocarditis when they in fact didn't have myocarditis. And it is irrefutable at this point. The studies are clear that these cases of myocarditis are being caused by the vaccine, not by the virus. The other thing that you just said that I think is, go ahead.
Yeah, it's true.
Say that
the inpatient troponin elevation that kicks off an ICD code, those aren't adjudicated cases.
Right.
So they're not bona fide cases of myocarditis. And so this was very sloppily reported. Even the American College of Cardiology has a position paper in the fall of 2022 saying, the illness causes more myocarditis than the vaccines. So therefore, we should give vaccines and cause more myocarditis. It doesn't make any sense. Cardiologists would never support giving something that causes heart damage under any circumstances.
Right. And then the other thing, and the elephant in the room, I will point out, you made the point that the children who ended up getting myocarditis had a mismatch between the antibodies that they have and the actual spike protein on the virus. In case people haven't connected the dots, the things most likely to give you that mismatch is having gotten a vaccine for a previous strain. And then, you get vaccinated for the original strain, for the Wuhan strain that they created. And then lo and behold, you get XBB. You're going to have the wrong antibodies. You are going to have that mismatch, people. That's how it happens. Okay, you vaccinate people and then they end up getting a different strain. So I think that also the Thai study, if I recall, there was a study in Thailand of young males, I think 13 to 19-year-olds, and they had proven that, I think it was about 300 kids, they had proven serologically that they had not had COVID. None of them had. They got the vaccine. And then I think 30% of them had EKG changes or evidence of cardiac injury following the vaccination. It was really I don't remember all the details of that study, but it was profound.
Yeah. You're citing that, remember the FDA told Pfizer, Moderna, they need to do prospective cohort studies where they measure everything at baseline, give the vaccine, and measure everything again. Neither company fulfilled that obligation. It's one of the reasons why they're not fully licensed, but neither one of the companies did. Mansukian studied children aged 13 to 18 on the second shot of Pfizer only and did baseline blood biomarkers and imaging, including MRI, and then at follow-up, and about 30% had symptoms. However, the number that actually met a definition of myocarditis using a multi-dimensional definition in that study was 2.3%. And then separately, a paper by Buren and Lepesic in Basel, Switzerland, studied shot number 3 of Pfizer in nurses, healthcare workers. And again, it turns out largely female. And the number there they got in terms of an elevation troponin and some other supportive data, the number they had was 2.8%. So they're pretty close. So we think about 2.5% of people do sustain some heart injury, and less than half of that evokes any symptoms. So most people don't know that they're sustaining heart damage.
What did you make, if anything, of at one point the FAA changed the guidelines for the EKGs for pilots for the FAA exam, and I think it had to do with loosening the restrictions with regard to PR intervals. I think on their EKGs, they made some substantive changes. Were you aware of that? That they changed the cardiac guidelines of the EKGs for pilots, and what, if anything, did you make of that?
I looked at it carefully. The PR interval got the most press, but it turns out they loosened dozens and dozens of cardiovascular criteria, but also dozens of neurologic criteria. So the entire set of criterion for fitness of a pilot loosened. And my read on this is that I think it's actually due to the aging of the pilot population. Now, it may be superimposed because there's more disease related to COVID or the vaccines, but I don't think we can pinpoint it. But any way you evaluate it, it is now, from a health perspective, easier to have a commercial pilot license.
Right. And then the last big thing I had that I wanted to pick your brain about, because I simply don't have a good handle on. People ask me all the time about this issue of shedding. I really don't know what the studies show. I really don't know that we've been able to prove it. What is your understanding of the risk of vaccine shedding or spike shedding with COVID?
I interviewed Helene Benoon, who's former INSERM scientist. Now she's independently doing review papers and scholarship in France. A real expert on this, and her belief is that there is bona fide shedding of spike protein, almost certainly, but it's probably immaterial. Data from the Framingham Heart Study, UT Houston, a big study, shows 97% of us have antibodies against the spike protein. So it's almost irrelevant. We're getting some spike re-challenge, orally, mucosally. It's not a big deal. The messenger RNA is a bigger deal. Now, two papers, one by Hannah and colleagues in JAMA, the other one recently from Japan in Lancet, show that breast milk is carrying the messenger RNA. That's for sure in freshly vaccinated mothers. Paper by Castriuta and colleagues show circulatory messenger RNA for 30 days in blood. And now a paper by Crossan and colleagues from Massachusetts General Hospital shows the messenger RNA stuck in the human heart associated with inflammation at 30 days, in these deaths that have occurred within 30 days of the shot. So it's very possible that messenger RNA could be shed in body fluids, certainly breast milk or sweat, what have you, within, let's say, 30 days of a vaccine, maybe 90 days to keep it safe. But there's never been a bona fide case demonstrating the transmission. There's never been a bona fide transfusion case of demonstrating that. And now the Associated Press is reporting October 4th, 2023, only 1.3% of people are taking any more shots. So we're down to a tiny fraction to even study this now. For most people, the vaccines are long in the rearview mirror.
Because I guess the question is, if we know that you have the mRNA in breast milk, for example, and we can presume that you may have it in sweat or saliva or other bodily fluids, I guess the question is, is there any indication that it can be absorbed that way? And the reason I make this segue is because we know now also, very concerningly, that they are injecting mRNA vaccines into the food source. They're injecting, beef and poultry with mRNA vaccines. And so I guess the question becomes, is there a risk of us being able to absorb it through the GI tract? Can it be absorbed through the intestine or the stomach lining and those sorts of things? What is the actual risk? Because I've said from the beginning of the pandemic that I believed that the goal was to make mRNA, that word, a household word, to make people believe that this platform is tried and true and tested and nothing to be worried about, and therefore we can just inject everything and everybody around us, with mRNA to no, concern. What do we know about whether or not you can absorb this stuff?
Well, I can tell you Zhang and colleagues in the preprint server, December 2022, demonstrated that a RNA for a restricted part of the spike protein, the receptor binding domain, that could be stabilized in a exosome, essentially a milk bubble. And once they created this, they fed milk to a mammalian model 3 times, fed it through the GI tract, and they were able to successfully immunize that mammal. Now we have a press release that one of the companies has made a nasally absorbed messenger RNA vaccine. So I think it's becoming clear that the nasopharynx and the GI tract will absorb and take up messenger RNA. The USDA on their website has multiple projects dealing with messenger RNA in the food supply. Now, some of these are to try to immunize the animals against disease. And then in the plants, the goal of these projects is actually to immunize humans, trying to immunize humans against diarrheal diseases or others through plants. Now, what's been absorbed? There's been one study demonstrating, I believe, watermelon juice. I think milk again will get it absorbed. They're going to find there's be different ways to get it absorbed. What's currently in the food supply? There's no messenger RNA that I'm aware of that's in the food supply right now. There are self-replicating RNAs, which are a little different. They replicate once and that's it. And that's in the pork supply since 2017. And, not all the farms use it, but it is, Merck's got a big sequivity program, for instance, and it's in swine, not yet in beef or other products.
Wow. All right. Well, I glossed over, not purposely, your last statement, however, about the significant decrease in vaccine uptake or interest, you should say, that people just aren't. What is your sense of, about, you and I and a few others have been clamoring for these things to be removed entirely from the market. I'm thrilled that there's vaccine hesitancy as a result of everything we know, but that is not enough. They should be removed. We can't rely on the lay individual to know this information and stay away from them. What is your sense about whether or not these things will, in fact, be fully removed from the market?
I don't think they're going to be removed. They are, they're presented by the Department of Defense and Health and Human Services. They are military countermeasures. The emergency has been dropped by the Biden administration in May of 2023. These aren't being dropped. This is what we describe in our book, this biopharmaceutical complex, the syndicate that's so powerful that they're going to continue these no matter what. You're right, they're announcing new messenger RNA vaccines. The U.S. government has made a massive investment in messenger RNA since 1985. Paper by Lalani and colleagues summarized that. There's over 9,000 patents on messenger RNA. 9,000. The top patent assignees are Sanofi, CureVac, BioNTech, Moderna, and the U.S. government. So there's been a love affair with messenger RNA for the longest time. Yep. I don't think it's going away, but there's no signs that it's becoming any safer. Carrico and Weissman just won the Nobel Prize because of pseudo-uridination, actually trying to make it last longer. Well, that would have been fine to replace a normal human protein like, insulin in type 1 diabetes or alpha-galactosidase and Fabry's, but it's not okay when you're producing a potentially dangerous antigen like the spike protein.
Yeah, and it really begs the question. The emergency is officially over. Even Joe Biden has announced it. So it really begs the question. There is not a single FDA approved vaccination for, and I use that term loosely, injection for COVID. Yet they are all available and they keep cranking out new ones under emergency use authorization. How is that even allowed? What's the emergency? We all have acknowledged that the emergency is over. How is it that they are getting away with continuing to push emergency use authorization, non-FDA approved injections?
It's a military mechanism. It's a National Security Administration mechanism. I think the whole FDA part of this is just choreography. I don't think an FDA really has to approve or not approve an emergency use authorized product. I mean, this is the mechanism that's used to vaccinate the military for anthrax and smallpox and other illnesses. So it's when our government apparatus decides that this countermeasure is going to be stopped, that's when it's going to be stopped. I think the FDA has nothing to do with it. I think that's the reason why there's a blind eye turned towards safety. The products are not bought and sold. Do you know that guy out in Utah who was giving fake vaccines, who given saline injections? You know what his charge was? Disposal of government property. That's what these vaccines are. These vaccines are government property. They're not even considered commercial biopharmaceuticals.
Wow. Well, I am cognizant of the clock winding down here, Drew.
Yes.
Yeah. What have I not covered here?
No, I think you've done a nice job. The only thing I would raise is something that came up on our stream, or our chat stream and Rumble Rant, and I don't know if this is even meaningful, but it came up a couple of times, which was Somebody mentioned that you might have had a conversation with Damar Hamlin, and they were asking what happened in that conversation. Is that true, A, and B, is that something you can share about?
I never had a conversation with Damar Hamlin, but I did pair up with another cardiologist, both of us very concerned. We wrote the Bills organization, we wrote the Buffalo Evening News, telling them that, listen, athletes who have a cardiac arrest, no matter what the cause, the standard of care is to have an implanted defibrillator. And our great concern is that he would be at risk for a repeat arrest. So, our words were transmitted, and we'll see. But following Damar Hamlin's very important, because he is the first athlete ever to have a full-blown cardiac arrest, require defibrillation, return to the field, ostensibly without a defibrillator. And the other notable case is Oscar Cabrera Adames, the Dominican player who takes a vaccine, gets myocarditis, has a cardiac arrest on the court, declares that it's myocarditis, cardiac arrest, tries to recover over 2 years. He's on a medical treadmill, no ICD, and he dies on the treadmill trying to come back. That's 2 years after his original case of myocarditis. That's the concern about Hamlin.
Yeah, and we've got Bronny. We've got Bronny James, Drew, who you're supposed to believe, as well as I do, the amount of testing that these athletes go through before they are hired on by a professional team. They go through the ringer. So we're now supposed to believe that he had some previously undiagnosed, quote, congenital heart problem that caused him to have a cardiac arrest in the middle of the court. I think it's preposterous. I don't think it simply isn't plausible in my mind that this could have been a congenital heart issue that was, quote, overlooked in all of the testing that he had prior.
I'd like to know what it was. What is the does he have right ventricular atresia or something? I mean, what does he have? Number one. Number two, for people. Go ahead, Dr.
That's the other thing. There's never a statement of what people have. With Damar Hamlin, no one came out and actually said what he has. Hamlin's the one who had to give himself the diagnosis of commotio cordis. With Bronny James, he probably had EKGs and echoes, I'd imagine. Everything looked fine. He didn't have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That's really what they're screening for. And then he has this near cardiac arrest. By the way, I don't think he had a full cardiac arrest because he was in and out of the ICU in hours. He was out of the hospital the next day. So I think he had a near miss and may have had some type of an arrhythmia. But he probably did undergo an MRI. They probably found a patent foramen ovale or atrial septal defect and said, aha, well, here's some previously undetected congenital heart disease. Now they have a storyline in order to kind of take it away. But they don't mention, did he take the vaccine or not? Bronny James went to a high school that strictly enforced all vaccines and everybody. Right. Then he goes to USC, which strictly enforces. And his dad says that it's the best thing to do to take the vaccine for him and his family in September of 2021. So almost certainly Bronny took the vaccine. The case to watch is actually Bronny's teammate, Vince Uichuchu. He has a full-blown cardiac arrest. Again, USC, a vaccinating university, presumably took the vaccine. He gets an ICD, presumably an implantable ICD, and now he's back playing. So he's going to be an interesting case to watch.
Wow.
And for people that these are little quarter-sized devices that go under the skin here in the clavicle area, and they treat any significant cardiac events after that from then on. They can also function as pacemakers. But all right, Dr. McCullough, we've been very kind with your time. We've kept you beyond where we should have.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.